So, you want to be a real estate investor, but where do you start? How do you know what information and sources to trust? That's where I come in. I'm Jonny Cattani, and this is the Investor Relations Real Estate Podcast. Hey guys, real quick, before we start, go to investwithcattani.com and download my free ebook, Is Commercial Real Estate Recession Proof? Now to today's show. What's up, guys, and welcome to another episode of the Investor Relations Real Estate Podcast. I'm your host, Jonny Cattani, and I am joined today by Jason Wisniewski. Farm boy from Southwest Minnesota, Jason has been on a learning journey, founding over a dozen businesses and had careers working in agriculture, technology, and commercial real estate. Now, Jason focuses on value-add agricultural land using regenerative soil health practices, and most recently began the process to correct his status as an American state national. He is passionate about holding the government accountable to the people and educating people about the laws of nature, nature's God, and the first Constitution for the United States of America. Jason, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, John. Excited to be here.
Absolutely. Looking forward to this conversation. We've had an awesome off-camera conversation so far, but let's kind of go back to the beginning here. Give us kind of the short story of, you know, where you started and kind of how you got to where you're at now.
Sure. Yeah, like you said, I grew up on a farm. My family has been farming for generations in Southwest Minnesota. When I was growing up, it was a struggle for the family to find a place for me on the farm. So I was always encouraged to look for other opportunities. So it was never an idea that I would stay and farm. So I took off for business school and moved to Fargo, North Dakota after high school and worked in agriculture technology for a company like John Deere, and then a smaller company developing electronics and doing business development for them. So I got to really see the inside of the big ag industry and learned a lot in that process, but always had a mindset of an entrepreneurial drive to do something on my own. And I always value freedom for my own time, and want to disconnect my earning potential from my time. So during my working career, employment career, I was always starting small businesses on the side, started a property management company with a couple of friends, and learned a lot from a more experienced investor that got me into that. And then I was at the same time buying some small investment properties, duplexes and triplexes and some single family. Then got into doing syndication, forming partnerships, limited partnerships, and eventually left the agricultural technology career and went full-time into being a commercial real estate agent and syndicator, pooling investors together. Became really interested in health after my grandmother passed away from cancer. And we had a really long decline in trying to help her through that. And it really made me question, what should I be doing and what should I be eating? And that's how I stumbled upon regenerative agriculture. There's a gentleman by the name of Gabe Brown who has a ranch, a 6,000 acre ranch by Bismarck, North Dakota, which was fairly close to me in Fargo. And I became good friends with him and began learning about how our food is created and how it goes all the way back to the soil. Coming from a farm, it really meant a lot for me to start to understand, and having worked in big ag, how our food system has become so consolidated and really controlled by federal programs. Farmers rely on crop insurance subsidies. 70% of their revenue comes from government programs. If there's ever a crop loss, they know they can rely on that federal money handed out by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. But the policies that they're making are destroying the small rural communities like I grew up in. I grew up outside of a small town of 500 people. 2 miles outside of that town was our farm. And over the years, as I return to visit, I see how the school is shrinking and how the businesses are leaving. And it's just gotten to the point where it's only a few very large farmers that own the majority of the land in the area. So I've been watching all this happen, trying to figure out what to do for my own health, how to protect my family's farms. We own 1,100 acres, and I see the threats of consolidation and how if we can't keep up with the growing need for capital, the current system requires producers to get larger and larger equipment and to invest in more buildings and infrastructure, grain storage. Meanwhile, they want them to put more and more expensive inputs like fertilizer and pesticides on the fields. That's what all the big ag lobbying companies, like the ones I worked for, John Deere, and then the various other companies I worked with there, I knew they didn't have the farmer's interest in mind. It was all about their bottom line. And that's what any corporation is designed to do, right? And we've had a real brain drain on our farms where the operators just want to be told what to do. And they look to their input providers, the guys that have their hands in their back pocket, to give them the answers. And of course, their answer is always buy more stuff, buy more equipment, buy more inputs, keep dumping this on the land. Well, when I connected my health with my family's farms, with my real estate experience, I saw it all align with this concept of regenerative agriculture. And in the real estate world, we might term it as a value add play for agricultural land. What we can do with regenerative agriculture is we can go in and we can improve farmland to the point where it does not need these expensive inputs any longer or the expensive equipment. And it can be ran by smaller operators profitably. Most operators, the large operators, look at yield before they look at profit, which it's the business sense in most of these operators has just been driven out of them because they're so reliant on the government subsidies. They know that they're going to be taken care of. But they could actually be a lot more profitable by reducing scale and implementing these regenerative practices. So I made a decision this past fall, especially with the pandemic stress that it was putting on our food system, to move back to the farms and start transitioning our 1,100 acres into more regenerative practices. So I'm in the process of doing that, making some really good headway with the renters that we have and taking some of the land back. And our goal is to really acknowledge the soil health. Beneath every building, beneath our feet, beneath the seats we sit on is soil. And in that soil, a teaspoon of soil will have billions of organisms, living organisms, bacteria and fungi. And they're critical to plants. And the value of farmland is directly connected to how well it can produce plants. So the value of farmland, therefore, is reliant on the health of those microorganisms. And this is a whole world of science we've been discovering, just starting to skim the surface of the biology in impacts in agriculture, biological impacts of these microorganisms in the soil, and how pouring all of these synthetic fertilizers and pesticides has been destroying that. And then the practice of tillage is one of the worst. And then in our area where corn and soybeans are primarily grown, exclusively pretty much in a 2-year rotation, corn, soybeans. In between those, we have 9 months of fallow where the fields are left bare and these microorganisms are starved. So not only are we hit them with tillage, we completely destroy their home, and then we come in and we spray pesticides, which are toxic to the microorganisms. And then that stuff carries into the food, which relates to our health, and into the water systems. If you look at the Gulf of Mexico, the exogenous area, or the dead zone, is it's devastating. And they call the Mississippi River Delta Cancer Alley. The cancer rates for people are through the roof. And that is all due to the millions and millions of acres of farmland that are running off these pesticides and fertilizers into the water stream, where then they don't even stay, they evaporate, and these chemicals actually go up and then they rain back down. So the highest concentrations of these chemicals are in the Mississippi River Delta, and you can map Dr. Zach Bush. If you look him up, he's actually mapped cancer rates that lay perfectly, over that watershed. So,
and that's like commercial, right? That's a big, like Tyson, I know, is a huge factor in that. And
livestock, right? Big chicken producer in Turkey. The confinement operations. What we in regenerative agriculture, what we'd like to see is to bring those animals out of the confined feeding operations and back onto the land. There is plenty of land available, especially when you consider that half of our corn crop goes to ethanol just to be burned up in our fuel tanks. And people say, this is one of the things that frustrated me when I worked in agricultural technology, is the coworkers that hadn't grown up on the farm had this perception that farmers were rich and that everything we were doing was to feed the world. But my perception coming from a small farm was, why, if we're on the edge of starvation and food is so valuable, why are these farms going out of business, and why have commodity prices been on a steady decline for the last 50, 60, 70 years? It doesn't make sense. And you look at where those crops actually go, they're not actually food, they're industrial products. Yeah, some of it makes it into our food, like high fructose corn syrup, stuff we don't need.
Which is illegal pretty much everywhere else in the world.
Right. And so it gets, once you see how corrupt the federal government system and policies are, because they're completely captured by big ag. The lobbyists work there. They have say in all the regulations. The EPA doesn't stand up to anybody because they've got a back door going directly to those chemical companies. Bayer, for instance, owns 90% of the seed varieties. And then they also sell the cancer drugs, so it's a real good business cycle for them.
I have so many questions.
Yeah, it's but there's this movement, this regenerative agriculture movement is really inspiring in the way that it can bring power back to the producer, the small producer. They don't need to have a lot of land. They do what they call stacked enterprises.
Yeah, so touch on this, explain this. I'm very curious as to what this process is.
Yeah, the foundation is the soil. The health of the soil is going to catalyze everything else. And that makes all of the food more nutritious, not only the plants that are growing from that soil, but also the livestock that eats those plants. And the livestock, what we've failed to acknowledge is how the livestock is a critical component of this system. Before, when the Europeans settled in the United States, they massacred the bison and elk and beaver populations And that had a huge impact on the environment. These huge herds of bison used to graze the prairies, and they had a biological synergy with the soil and the plants. You know how much a dog sheds. Well, these beasts shed a lot of biology when they're grazing. Their fecal matter and their urine stimulate the soil in numerous ways. That their gut bacteria is transferred back to the soil. In a lot of ways, all living things, guts or stomachs, digestion systems are full of the same microorganisms that live in the soil. They're the same, or somewhat, wow. You could call them like cousins in
Talk
some
about
instances.
Symbiotic.
And so that's one of the things that frustrates me about the vegan movement too, is, you know, confinement operations and the way we do agriculture has created so much controversy. Confined animal feeding operations, CAFOs, are terrible for the environment. I'm not going to deny that, but that's the how, not the cow. Have you heard that?
No, I haven't heard that before.
It's not the cow, it's the how. We need to bring those animals out of those situations where they're being fed grain, which their rumen has never been evolved to eat purely grain. You know, out in nature, they're eating grass. We need to bring those, and they're so when they're in these confined feeding operations, they need to be pumped with antibiotics and just to keep them alive, and they're sick and they're miserable. I mean, it's really sad. So I love eating meat, but I have a respect for the animal. And I wish more people would look for a local source of grass-fed or pastured protein. Some animals like chickens and turkeys and hogs can't eat purely grass, but when they're raised on pasture, they're much healthier and they can contain a lot more nutrition. There's a whole field of study right now into phytonutrients. There's over 180,000 phytonutrients that exist, more than you could ever put on a nutrition label. And we're just beginning to learn how critical some of these phytonutrients are, and how depleted our current food is because of these consolidated systems. For instance, you have to eat 8 oranges today to get the same level of vitamin C as you did 60 years ago.
Wow.
From a single orange.
Sheesh.
And that all starts with the soil.
Okay, so this all starts with the soil. And so what does regenerative look like? Is it just all natural, right? So kind of that, you know, obviously like sustainable farming is starting to take off, or well, I shouldn't say starting to take off. In my purview, it's come to light more, right? A lot of Americans are really starting to pay attention to what they're eating, right? And where it's coming from and the sourcing. And like my grandparents have 1,200 acres in Idaho. So
cool.
I'm familiar. They had, and one set did grain, another is actually selling all of their cattle and kind of getting out of the business. But again, same thing, man, that beef is just, I wish everybody could taste that beef who likes meat, because you would really understand.
No, I'm going to start doing taste tests, you know, just like have a corn-fed burger next to some grass-fed. It's obvious. The corn-fed stuff now, it just tastes like water to me.
So this regenerative thing then goes back to the soil. So we eliminate fertilizer then. So kind of talk about what this process looks like in terms of really implementing it.
Yeah, we don't need to full stop eliminate all this stuff as part of the regenerative. There's just beginning to be labels that are verifying regenerative practices for food companies and consumers. I'm an auditor for one called Regenerative, which is probably the one with the most integrity that's out there. So what we do with Regenerative is we'll go out to a farm and we will take a bunch of different tests. We'll talk with the producer. We'll make sure that they have a plan in place, and we want to see them progress over 5 years to eliminate as much of those chemicals as possible. And it's really just about seeing progress, a constant reduction of those chemicals and an improvement of the soil and the profitability and the biodiversity on the farm.
So you're saying we can save it. It's not too late to save it and bring it back.
Yeah, that's one of the coolest things. And one of the things we're learning is just how resilient nature really is. Since the Dust Bowl in the 1930s, farmers have been told that it takes by the national, the NRCS, National Resource Conservation Service. They've been told it takes 100 years to build 1 inch of topsoil. So it's really been defeating for producers because they've had this message pounded into them for the last 100 years that once topsoil is lost, you can't regenerate it, essentially, if it takes 100 years just to do 1 inch. That's false. That is what the people in regenerative agriculture have discovered and have proven, is you can build topsoil much, much faster. I have farmers that I work with that have built 18 inches in 10 years.
Wow.
And it's just a matter of making sure that you leave organic matter in the field as much as possible, and you build up that organic matter, which is carbon. And this all connects to climate. Everybody wants these fancy machines to sequester carbon from the atmosphere. Nature already has a solution in grass, in plants, in trees. Grass actually is better than trees by a factor of like 7 or 8. At sequestering carbon, because during the photosynthesis process, plants take in carbon dioxide and they pump it down into their root system, and then they exchange that carbon dioxide with the microorganisms. And that carbon is they slough off their roots, and it's stored in the ground. So if we had less tillage, which releases carbon, that's something that nobody ever talks about. One of the biggest contributors to carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is the practice of tillage on millions and millions of acres across the world.
Explain what that is for people who may not understand.
Plowing, everybody, what the plow is. They said when we originally settled this land and you had to pull a 1-bottom plow behind an ox, the first time they broke the grasslands of the Great Plains, you could hear the root structures breaking like a bullwhip from a mile away. Now we've got, it's incredible. Now we've got tillage implements that are 100, probably not for tillage, that's for a seeder, but 60 to 80 foot wide tillage machines, plows, that are pulled by 800 horsepower tractors, and they can cover an immense amount of land. It destroy immense amount of land in a very short order. And they've got automated systems, so you barely even need a driver now to just completely keep destroying this soil. And that just whenever you plow the soil, you dig it up, you're destroying the mycorrhizal fungi, which have these intricate networks, and it's essentially like taking a bulldozer through a city, a massive bulldozer, and taking out all the streets and avenues and buildings, and saying that's good for the inhabitants of that city. That's what you were doing, because these mycorrhizal fungi networks are the highways for nutrients and water. Plants their root systems only go so far before they connect with these fungal networks that then go out for thousands of feet, sometimes miles, and capture nutrients from all across the field.
So what should the process be then?
There's a defined set of 6 soil health principles. The 6 soil health principles are: number 1, minimize disturbance. That means no tillage and minimal pesticide use, traffic on the field. So leave the land alone, get the heavy equipment off it. Don't be digging into it. Let the natural process grow. Let the fungal networks grow. Let the plant roots grow without disturbance. Secondly is diversity. Nature, what we do in our fields is we grow these huge monocultures. You'll see miles and miles of just one plant, corn or soybeans, miles and miles. And that creates lots of issues with pests. There's so much symbiosis in nature between different types of plants that diversity is critical to supporting predator insects that will eat the pest insects, and to reduce pathogens in the soil. Third is keep a living root in the soil at all times. So the only way that those microorganisms can be fed is through plants. And if you don't put seed into the ground, the soil is going to cover itself up some way. There's a latent seed bank in all soil. Seeds can last for hundreds of years. And they'll start to sprout if you just leave soil alone. The first thing that comes is what we call weeds, because those are the most resilient plants. It's just they're the first responders. So maintaining a residue or an armor that prevents water erosion. It also prevents sunlight to getting to those forbs, those undesirable forbs or weeds. And it holds the soil in place. The fifth one is to integrate livestock when possible. So we talked about all the symbiosis between livestock and land. Livestock has been shown to really boost the ability for land to regenerate itself and to support those microorganisms. And then the last one is just to know your context. Everybody's got a different situation on these farms and different social aspects that they have to work around, different weather patterns. In Minnesota, we've got a lot more cold weather and we can't get in 2 crops. It's harder to get in cover crops. So you have to really consider what your context is in that regard.
Interesting. Okay. Wow, this has been incredible insight. Very fascinating. I would absolutely love to have you on again here shortly, because I feel like we've barely scratched the surface of all of this, and we didn't even get to our anti-establishment rant. But we will certainly revisit it. But I do have 5 questions that I ask all of my guests at the end. So we'll jump to those. First one is, what's the best advice you've gotten from a mentor?
I followed in real estate Rod Cleef for several years, and I still look up to him. And one of the things he said is, where focus goes, energy flows. So it's really about whenever you want to accomplish something, just hunker down and focus on that. Put everything else out.
I love that. So true. What is it about your career that makes you feel like you're fulfilling your why?
That's one of the best things I've probably learned over the last few years is just when you align with what feels right and you're no longer doing something just for the money, you can accomplish so much more, and people can see your passion, and you can connect in more meaningful ways in all of your relationships. So that's how I know I'm on the right track, is when I feel that passion, and it gives you the energy to push forward even when you have setbacks.
Gosh, that's so true. That's incredible insight, because it's something that I don't think enough people talk about. but when you know, you can just feel it, like you said. And it does. It really helps you through those tough spots. Favorite non-real estate or investment related book?
The first one that came to mind was 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Gosh, it's such a good book.
I need to read it like every year just to get a refresher, but that thing has got so many nuggets in it.
Yeah, that's a great one.
Stephen Covey was a great man.
Back on the list. If you could have any superpower, what would it be?
A superpower would, I always thought it'd be cool to know everything, but now I don't think that would be so cool. So maybe something like flying, being able to fly without a rocket pack or something.
That's easily mine for sure. Flying would be so awesome. So yeah, I'm going to step out for a quick flight.
Zip over.
I love it. Awesome. And last one, what's the best way for people to get a hold of you and learn more if they want?
People can email me at jason@jwsoil.com if they want to learn any more about what I'm working on.
Cool. Awesome. We'll link that in the show notes. Jason, seriously, thank you so much. This has been awesome. Really awesome insight.
Appreciate you having me on, John.
Absolutely. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching today's episode. I hope you really enjoyed it. Listen, I know it's cliche and you hear it all the time, but please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you know when the next video is coming out. Even though this is technically a daily podcast, it's coming out the next day. We have a ton of content coming your way. So please like and subscribe. It helps a ton. Leave comments. Would love to know what you guys think. And we will see you on the next one. Thanks so much.